This is the Cycling Over 60 podcast, Season 2, Episode 14, a Republic of Korea bike trip, and I'm your host, Tom Butler. I'm not very happy right now about my cycling at all. I am very anxious to get prepared for this season's challenge. However, my life has become very focused on trying to get more control over my blood glucose. It ends up being the major thing that happens on a day-to-day basis. As I mentioned last week, wearing a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, is giving me some very important data. I can't believe that it will be too long before anybody with an elevated A1C will have access to a CGM. I just see it as that valuable for anybody beginning to struggle with blood glucose issues. I definitely don't think it should be held back just for people that have already seen some significant insulin resistance. It has been so valuable to see how my body is reacting to what I eat. But there are a couple things that are interfering with me getting out on the bike. First, I am not eating very many calories. So I am not sure from that perspective what going out for a decent bike ride would mean. Since getting the monitor, I have done a couple of rides, and they actually spiked my blood glucose. Coach Lisa and I have come up with a ride that we think won't have that impact as a way of testing what I can do and making some modification as time goes on. I hope to try that very soon. There's a timing issue about when I exercise. I'm eating in a way specifically designed to slow digestion. That in turn slows absorption of glucose. So I need to wait the right amount of time after eating in order to have anything in my bloodstream to power the ride. Right now, I am riding an exercise bike 10 or 11 times a day. That strategy is to burn glucose without triggering a rise in blood sugar. The major impact so far with having the CGM is that the close monitoring has allowed me to consistently lose weight. I am now down to 212 pounds. Since insulin resistance is closely linked to body fat, I'm hoping that losing a few more pounds will start to give me some flexibility with my activity and my food intake. I'm also doing modified fasting. Again, I'm hoping that resets my response to insulin. Overall, I have a lot of hope that I'm taking the right steps to turn things around. I do truly wish I would have been doing this 5 years ago and heading things off before they progressed this far. A couple of months ago, during the episode on the Great Cycle Challenge, I had the privilege of meeting Charlie Manzoni, a board member of the Children's Cancer Research Fund. He mentioned that he was doing a unique ride for this year's Great Cycle Challenge that took place in September. I'm really pleased that he came back on the podcast to share about that trip. Here's my interview with Charlie and Steve Looney, who joined him on his journey. During the October 24th episode on the Great Cycle Challenge, Charlie Manzoni shared that he was going to be doing a ride in Korea, and we are fortunate that he has come back to share about the trip with us. Thanks, Charlie, for coming back.
Oh, great to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Charlie is joined by someone who did the ride with him, Steve Looney. Thank you for coming on as well, Steve.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I kind of had to come on because of the photos that Charlie took on the ride, but it's nice to be here in any event.
All right, good. Before we talk about the trip, I'm wondering, Charlie, if you have any information you can share about how this year's Great Cycle Challenge ended up.
Sure. I mean, it's we raised a total of a little over $9 million. You know, this was the 9th year of the Great Cycle Challenge, and during that 9 years, we've raised over $72 million.
Wow.
And next year, being the 10th anniversary, we're looking to make it even more of a significant event. I'm not quite sure what that means, but there'll be extra effort put into it. So anyway, overall, it was good. We're very happy with the results.
Well, I feel like I'm going to have to think about something special to do since it's the 10th anniversary. I wasn't thinking about that. So yeah, that's a good thing to be thinking about for next year.
Maybe you can talk Steve into participating.
I think he has somebody
extra benefit by mile.
Okay. Well, I think he has somebody pretty close to him that can probably talk him into that. As so, and just a reminder, people, you can go to the August 24th episode and learn a lot about the Great Cycling Challenge. You guys did such a great job of kind of breaking it down. But just a reminder about where that money goes, the organization and the focus of the organization.
Sure. It's the ride is sponsored by the Children's Cancer Research Fund. That fund has been around for many years. Its focus is raising money to invest with or to grant mainly to up and coming scientists that are looking for cures for childhood cancer. And the organization also provides social support to families whose children are suffering from cancer.
Awesome work, and it's just so good to hear those numbers and know that there's going to fund some work that wouldn't otherwise get funded. So that's fantastic. So you guys did this, what I think is an epic trip. The thing that I'm first curious about is, how did the idea of cycling in Korea come about, and kind of what motivated you to take on this adventure?
Well, I'm going to turn that one over to Steve because the origins of the trip came from him.
Yeah, so I am involved with a group of guys of a lot of ill repute, including my brother, and we have cycled, around various places in the U.S. All credit card cycling with sag wagons and not. And we put together a trip to Taiwan several years ago, 6 guys, and we called it the Taiwan Six, and we had a wonderful time there. The origins of that are back in the alleged mind of one of the guys there named Peter Jones. And I picked up on this through some friends that have been to Korea and thought this would be interesting, and pitched it to that group, and they shot me down for the fall. The timing was just kind of right for me, and Charlie was able to do it as well. So it kind of came from them. And then as we were getting ready to launch it, Charlie did really the lion's share of the background work and how to do it and how to organize it, and all of that.
Had you been familiar very much with Korea or with cycling in Korea, or was it pretty open?
No, not at all. I mean, one friend, particularly here in New York, is involved in foreign affairs and so on, and goes there a lot, and she's Korean descent, and she had mentioned to me that there was a lot of cycling over there, and I sort of scratched my head, and said, if you had too much soju or something. But Charlie got into it and started realizing that it's really developed. It's amazing. He got on it, and it came through. But I'll pass to Charlie.
Tom, I think when Steve first suggested it, I thought, Korea, it's crowded. I can't imagine trying to navigate my way through a country where we don't speak the language. And then I found this website. I think I sent it to you, this koreabybike.com. And I was blown away. I mean, it's just, there's so much information on there. These curated routes that are in various parts of the country, all sorts of information about how to rent bikes, how to get around public transportation with bikes. So once I saw that, I was convinced that this would really be a cool trip to do, and it wouldn't be all that difficult to plan it because it was already planned on this website. You had different places to call to check out, what you could do in the way of renting bikes and the like, and it made it easy. And the routes, I didn't know what to expect because there's a bunch of different routes there. The one we did was called the cross country route. And, it talked about trails. I mean, I thought before going over there, there'll be a trail here and a trail there, but it's going to be connecting you to roads. And I don't know. See, I think 80% of the trip was on trails, if not more. So it was unbelievable.
And nice trails.
Nice trails, yeah. Very
Awesome.
well maintained, yeah.
Now, when you talk about nice trails, like the pavement integrity and stuff is part of that. How about kind of facilities along the trail? Did they have restrooms and things like that?
Yeah, except for when you really go out in the country. But yeah, plenty of places to stop. And I mean, beyond that, there were these different areas there were trees and bushes planted to make it a pleasant place to ride.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It was just like, it was way, way over the top.
The route that you did, I think, I pulled up the website and I can imagine as you started thinking about how do I plan this out, and then you saw that, how in depth that information was. I can imagine that making a big difference as far as you have to do a lot of work. I think the route that you did covered pretty much all of Korea, north to south. Is that right?
Well, all of South Korea, we did not
Right.
go north.
That's right.
But it sort of went to the center of the country, and it went along the Han River and I can never say it, neck, two major rivers with mountains in between. So it was pretty obvious as to where you were going.
The route is made up of 4 different paths that connect with each other. And the other thing we ought to mention, Steve and I didn't do this, but there's a whole concept there of going to these certification booths and having a biking passport and getting your passport stamped. And then if you've done all of the route, you get some recognition. And if you do all of the routes, then you get super recognition. We did not do the certification. So the cross-country route was made up of these 4 different paths. The first one was from Ishian to Seoul. We did not do that because the Seoul International Airport is actually in Ishian, if I'm pronouncing that right. And we were renting our bikes in Seoul, and we just didn't want to bother to go back just to do that. I think it's probably about 30 miles. And then the second leg of the trip, as Steve was mentioning, is all along the Han River, starting in Seoul and ending in a place called Cheongju City. And then the next leg is the mountain passes. There's 2 mountain passes that you go over, and that's called the Sajay Path. Again, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. When you get done with that segment, you actually end up at the Nakdong River. There's the Nakdong Gang Path, which takes you all the way into Busan from there. So much of the route is along a river.
And it was just the 2 of you, or did you have people join you for part of it, or how did that go?
Well, it was just the 2 of us riding together. We did have some opportunity to meet people, and one particular couple we rode with pretty much a whole day and then met up with them in Busan. We can elaborate a little bit on them because they were pretty fascinating. They were from Australia and England, and they were on a ride around the world. They'd already done Eastern Europe, Western Europe, India, Thailand, Mongolia.
Together, they were over. If you added them together, they were over 60 too. So they sort of relate to the.
Gotcha.
They have a site called. It's got a lot of followers. It's on YouTube called We Ride Bikes.
Okay.
The pictures in Mongolia were amazing, and maybe for some of your viewers, they might want to look at that as well. That they were riding a little fatter tire, sort of stuff, but they were very geared up to do it, and had not done virtually any biking 3 years ago. And they planned this and saved up, quit their jobs, and so they were. And then we met a Chinese that Japanese guy was pretty amazing up on the pass.
Yeah. And then we didn't get to know him, but I thought this was fascinating. Riding into Busan, I saw a bike with a little child seat in front, and it had its own pedals, and it was fully loaded with camping gear and everything. And I'm riding along the path. I saw it on the side, but then along the path, a woman passes me on that bike with a little kid in front. And I wanted to talk to her, but she was up ahead and I couldn't. But then I noticed maybe 10, 15 minutes later, there was the identical setup behind me with a man and a kid on it. And they were from, he said, I was able to talk with him, but they were from Switzerland and France. I think they'd been The kids look like I don't know, 9, 10 years old. They'd been on the road for over a year.
Wow. That's quite a family adventure for sure. That sounds awesome. Now, did you fly your bikes over or you talked about rental? Is that the way that you rent?
Yeah, Steve did most of the work on that. I'll let him talk about that
Yeah,
whole process.
I think they were touted through the connection, and then I picked up on it because I had a very interesting experience getting flying the bikes to Asia is I don't I wouldn't do it. I just think it gets a little too complicated. But if you had a good bike shop, you land them in there, and maybe also rate wise. But in Taiwan, it was run by Giant Bicycles and very well run, but the communications was very difficult. This one, the communications were very difficult. There were some language issues, but this bike rental shop in Seoul was very well organized. But the cultural differences were something to get through. Things like we wanted to bring our own pedals, and for some reason there was an insurance charge to put the pedals on take the pedals off and put the pedals on. Yeah, and there were some things like that, and it was sort of getting it lined up was sketchy, and then how the money flowed was a little bit sketchy. But it ended up being all quite ordinary in a Korean sense. But being both of us have been accused of being lawyers in prior lives, and we're kind of trying to nail things down. And it was pretty hard, to nail it down. And then, but the top of the top was when you get to the guy, you say, we're coming to Seoul. This is, it's a decent trip coming out to the U.S. to land over there and get in and so on. And we'll be in, and we find out he's not going to be at the bike shop. In fact, he's hardly ever at the bike shop.
Interesting.
And we had to pay the full price before we left.
Wow. Okay.
But he's got good reviews. And so, so in any event, what he was doing, Tom, was he was handling the bike shop remotely, probably had another job, and it was a nice bike shop. And so you come to the door and you wave, and the door opened, and there were our bikes.
That is interesting. So the door just unlocks.
Yeah. Oh, remotely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Anybody can do that. I would imagine that there's, there must be a bit of a volume. You think about Seoul being a pretty good sized place. It seems like there'd be a bit of a volume of a need for rental bikes there.
Yeah, they had one of the bike service like City Bike for getting around. They had the similar thing. It was hard to tell. I think he was specializing on people who toured.
Right. Okay.
Our bicycles were brand new.
Oh, okay.
Outfitted very nicely. We didn't see any people there. I think he was mostly the foreigners. What do you think, John?
Yeah, because the other thing when you get to the shop, because one of the questions you have is we've got our luggage, right? But we aren't bringing our own panniers. We're renting those from him. So we're going to wonder, well, what do we do? What do we do with our luggage? And he says, oh, you just leave it in the back room. So when we got to the shop, we loaded our panniers, had our whatever we left in the bag, and go to the back room. And in the back room, there's a whole bunch of other bags. So it's a pretty common process. And I know, Steve, you must have been a little concerned because you left a computer in your bag, right?
Yeah. But what we learned, and we didn't have as nearly as good a feel. That was day 2 or 3. But Korea is extremely safe.
Gotcha.
And the incidence of crime is, very, very low. You could leave, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could leave a cell phone, on a table at a restaurant and not even call them and come back 3 weeks later and be 90% sure that they had it. Just very reliable and really wonderful people to interact with, top to bottom, but very safe. And so, but for us, leaving our stuff there was kind of like, there's somebody from Sweden, and that looks like a nice, It was not.
So you get to Busan and then you need to get back to Seoul. And get the bikes back? Did you leave the bikes there in Busan? Was there a way to do that, or how did that work out?
That was we arranged a pickup. So we had a kind of the whole package. The package evolved over a while.
Okay.
The communications weren't that well, but they had a pickup there. They started off having us pick up at some inn or restaurant, drop off there, and be having him pick up. And then that moved, and it turned out he had some service or knew someone that could go back basically any place to pick your bike up. We were pretty careful about that, but they picked it up very right on time. All of that, it worked great. And then we got on the train, which was there was sort of a movie implication of this. That we recommend the last train to Busan for those of you who like zombies.
Okay. Okay.
And this is the reverse trip. It's kind of brings you down, Tom, because you it's trying to get into this. You sweat, you toil, for all these days, and then you go back in about seemed like an hour.
That's awesome.
And a luxurious ride. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was a nonstop from Busan to Seoul. I think we were going 150 miles an hour or more.
Wow.
You felt like you were on an airplane.
So high speed rail, obviously.
High speed rail. But on these pickups, it's you can do that. You can rent it. We recommend it, and then land and drop it off, and just arrange with that. A rental agency was good, the whole thing, and then they arranged all that. I think there might be a couple of others.
Yeah, there were two or three of them mentioned in that Korea by Bikes website. The other thing Steve was talking about, the pedals. I mean, the charge that we had for using our own pedals was not for them to put them on and take them off, because we had to put them on since there's no one at the shop, and we had to take them off because we wanted them. We needed them to go home with, since they were picking up the bike. So the charge, he told us eventually, the charge was, in his experience, he had worked in other bike shops, and he just opened this year. And his experience with the other bike shops in Korea is that the people who chose to use clip-on pedals brought the bikes back with more damage on the bikes than people with flat pedals. That was the reason for the charge.
That's interesting. But I have a lot of questions about that. Like, what's going on there? Or is that just an explanation for an insurance charge?
I would say on the trails, just making an observation of other riders, I'd say most riders were on flat pedals.
Okay. How did you know what to carry with you? Just from previous experience, or had talked to somebody who had done this trip, or how did you figure that out?
I'll tell you what I did. We didn't coordinate. I mean, I looked at the weather and going out those days and made sure I brought at least one thing that was warm in case the predictions were wrong, and brought a rain jacket, which I didn't need. And other than that, I mean, it's just, cycling shorts and a shirt and something to wear around town at night. It's pretty easy. I mean, the panniers that we rented at the shop, probably, at least in my case, would have held another 50% of clothing that I brought.
Yeah, I've done it a few times, and exactly it. I didn't think as carefully as Charlie did on this and a lot of things. So I had a little bit more on the warm side, thinking it's cold in Korea. Well, it was 100 degrees. Basically, that just the layers, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this, but you had to carry things that you can rinse out when you get in the afternoon, and they'll dry out. So that quick dry stuff is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Steve is also operating on the principle that if it's really hot and sunny, the best color to wear is black.
Okay.
I don't want to get into the whole fashion argument, Charlie. He wears all this bike stuff and so on. Look at Tom. He's all black. He's a fashion. He knows what he's doing.
Well, it's not quite 100 degrees and sunny here, though. So lodging, was it easy? Was that something that you had lined up ahead of time, or were you kind of, as the miles went, you were thinking, here's where we're going to be, and set it up on the road? How did that work?
That was quite interesting. We had it bracketed either end.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had arranged Airbnb stay in Seoul and an Airbnb stay in Busan. And in addition to that Korea by Bike website, the other very helpful piece of information, there's a Facebook group called, I think it's called Seoul to Busan, that I joined. Steve, I think you might have too at some point.
Yeah.
People would be talking about their trip and how it went. And they'd ask questions about do you need to book a hotel ahead of time? And it was pretty universally reported that there's no problem in finding a place to stay.
Cool.
There's an issue about the quality of some of these places, but we had a wide range we range from these things called love motels, which are designed for men that are cheating on their wives and girlfriends, and there's no credit cards, there's no check-in. You just pay cash and get a key and gone in the morning.
Okay.
I would say it's more like pursuing multiple relationships, Charlie. Do you have to have such a charged word for that?
So there are a couple of those. Well, the first one we stayed in was Motel 7. And that was right off the trail. I'd say the hardest thing I think we experienced, at least I felt, we haven't talked about this, was that there were a couple of times when we were looking to get to a particular part of a town and stay in an area that had some culture or something in it. And when we did that and got off the trail, that was the hardest part of the day. I mean, we might have ridden 50 miles, but the last two were the hardest.
Yeah, I think at the town of Gumi, it was quite a ride.
Okay.
And I would say, in my defense as being navigation officer, that it's interesting that Google Maps is pretty reliable in Europe and around. In Korea, and some of the listeners may know more about this, somehow they've shut down some of the features of Google Maps. And so you can kind of know where you are in a town or in an area, but certain things aren't on there. Certain things are blocked. And they're trying to drive you, I think, to a Korean-owned map, which surprised me for Korea, which had a lot of their characters on it. And it was hard to translate. So I was operating with two maps, to work with. And particularly in the cities, that ended up being a little bit difficult. And then you kind of know that it's a hotel on the Korean version, but you don't, finding exactly how to know is something available. There was some interaction of that, which also affected us a bit on the roads, knowing what type of a road it was and so on. So for listeners that are going over there, I would not rely on just Google Maps. The overall worked fine, but to make a decision, you might spend 10 minutes at it on the fly and then make the wrong decision.
Gotcha.
So we had a little bit of that, but that was all that off the trail. Yeah.
The app that we relied on most was called Naver. There's a couple of Korean map apps that they talk about in these on these websites, but Naver seems to be one of the most used. And they have an English version, but for some reason, as Steve was saying, some of it's in English, but a lot of it isn't. So it makes it very difficult.
Now, you had mentioned that the trails were in nice shape. It seems like I saw a picture of a lot of debris at some place. What was the story there?
Well, earlier in the summer, there was a major typhoon that hit South Korea. And we saw along the route, I mean, there was one area where bridges must have been, 30, 40 feet above the river, but there was debris that was stuck in the bridge that had been forced through because of the water levels went up so high. And at this one part of the trail, do you remember what part that was? Was that on Nakdong River?
Yeah, right? After we gone over it was on the higher end of the Nakdong River. Yeah, it was wiped out, and so we were routed. Weirdly, the trail kind of ended, and we don't quite know what happened, but it happened to the people behind us, the couple, we ride bikes couple, and so we got off on the side for a day. But that area, it was a little further south, maybe half of the way down to Busan. I don't remember. Yeah, something like that. it must have been wiped out for 20, 30 miles.
In both Seoul and in Busan, did you get a feeling like they're very bikeable cities? Do you think there's a focus on that?
No, not really not. But along the river, there were a lot of cycles, but not within the city, as opposed to a lot of U.S. cities. We didn't see much in the way of bike lanes. We may have missed some areas.
I don't think I saw any bike lanes. I mean, we were on sidewalks a lot of the time because there wasn't even a lot of room between the curb lane and the sidewalk.
Busan, being the second largest city, had some bike lanes running along the rivers and so on that went and then out by the beach, but nothing. You wouldn't see someone riding around in most of the cities. They would all be at the park. If they weren't biking, they'd be playing something like golf. What is that game, Charlie?
Gate golf.
Interesting.
We saw these all along the way, along the river, flat areas. There'd be like an 18-hole golf course, but pretty short holes. And there'd be people walking out there, each of them holding a single club and a bigger ball than a golf ball, more like a wiffle ball. And you tee it off, and then you hit the next shot onto the green. There's a flag, and you putt it, but you did this whole thing with one club.
Interesting. Okay.
So you can take any little park and turn it into a golf course, and then the cyclists would be going by, and Charlie stopped for about 40 pictures of that sport. He's
Well, maybe you need to import that to Minnesota, huh?
Well, we have a short golf season here, I think.
Yeah, right.
But you get like 3 weeks a year, right?
So then the terrain, you talked about riding across the river or along the rivers. It sounds like, from what I read, that there's a pretty significant hill about halfway, and online someone described it as atrocious. So do you know what they're talking about when they're talking about the atrocious hill?
Well, it's the one path I mentioned, that Seiji path, which crosses two mountain passes. When you look at the graphic, when they show the vertical, I mean, it looks horrible. I don't know. It's just a long, I don't know what degree it was. It wasn't horrible. It was just a grind.
Gotcha.
I don't know, Steve, what do you think? It's
Well, as I found it very walkable.
Okay.
No, I agree. Had I been biking I hadn't been biking for months before we did this. Oh no, that's right. I was up in Canada, in BC, early in the summer, but really was not in shape. But overall, they were not tough. They were two in the same day. But
Gotcha.
I've done a little bit over in central Washington State. Some of those, and we didn't get the same grade, but it was. It was on a hot day as it was. It good enough. Yeah. Of course, then we saw the couple that went up the thing we did, down the other side, and we're coming back up. I hate that.
So maybe not atrocious, but challenging, especially if you're not used to doing a lot of hill climbs, maybe.
Well, you compare it to the rest of the route, which is along a river. I mean, that's the only elevation was crossing bridges and weirs, and I mean, but those are just short little.
Yeah, there were a couple climbs over the mountains at the river, but not the bad. And we missed at the washout. We missed the other little climb. Yeah.
I thought one of the most enjoyable parts of the trip was the tunnels. It's on a repurposed railroad track, and you just go through, I think, 8 tunnels in one day, and it's spectacular. Well lit. Some of them have artwork in them.
That's fun. Yeah, and you're not sharing with cars, so that's awesome.
Right.
Yeah. They spent a lot of time and effort and made the tunnels very pleasant.
You talked about the cultural or language barriers. Looking back at it, was it actually pretty easy to navigate? Is there anything you would do differently about that?
I don't think I'd do anything differently. I sort of got what I expected. Outside of Seoul and Busan, there's very little English spoken. We were lucky. We were talking about the kinds of places we stayed in. One of the places we stayed in was a Korean guest house, And this was basically a man and a wife who ran this mainly for cyclists, and they don't speak any English at all. We were looking for a place to stay, came across Steve using his navigation, got us to this guest house, but we weren't even sure it was a guest house because there was just a bunch of Korean characters, but a bunch of people were hanging outside. And it turned out that among those bunch of people were some cyclists that we had seen earlier in the day. And Steve, you must have engaged with them. I didn't. One of them was born and raised in Skokie, Illinois, but she's Korean and lives in Seoul. The others were from places like Malaysia, Singapore, Canada. A few of them spoke English. So the woman from Skokie saw us and knew we were helpless, and she negotiated with us on getting us a room.
It wasn't helpless, it was hopeless, she said.
Hopeless, right? But so, I mean, we started out by saying, we need 2 rooms. And they go, what? No, this is not that kind of place. We'll give you 1 room. It's got a mat on it. And and you get the room, and it comes with the room, dinner, breakfast, and the hostess washes your bike clothes. That came to a total of $45 each. They only took cash, and the only cash we had were dollars, and all I had was $100. So I gave them $100 for a $90 cost, but then they threw in as much beer as we wanted.
Okay.
They were actually the couple was delightful, but you couldn't, no communication. But I would say that in the cities that it's very English friendly, because that's it's what you use in a lot of places. I've been out to the Balkans and so on. Very good, as opposed to Japan, which I have never found quite as English friendly. So signs and all kinds of things in English and announcements and that sort of thing. But more out in the country, almost, no English that we ran into.
So Steve, Steve stayed in Seoul a few more days than I did. So I had very limited experience in Seoul. I had more time in Busan. Did you think the two were comparable in terms of their English speaking abilities, or no?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think probably. I'm just thinking of the public, more of the public transportation,
the signage,
signage, and so on. You don't have to get just the kanji characters. You get an English thing as well, and announcements in English, catering to Europeans and to the U.S. that are all able to handle that language.
Yeah. So Tom, the other thing, anyone that's thinking about doing this trip, in addition to those Korean navigation apps, there's an app called Google Translate, which I had never used before, but was phenomenal. I mean, you could hold it up to a sign and it would tell you what the sign said in English. You could set it up for speaking, like I could be in a restaurant and ask the waitress what something was, and it would print out in Korean, and then she would reply in Korean, and it would print out back to me in English. It was pretty amazing.
That's an awesome tool. And did they seem pretty familiar with that tool, or was that something that you were introducing to them?
I don't know. Did you get the sense that they were familiar with it, Steve?
In general, they're more advanced on internet and all across the country, but they're using their own apps than we are, than most of the U.S. And I don't want to speak for Seattle because I know that that Microsoft, all this stuff, but people are pretty the young world, but they were pretty. That was pretty well good. But the fact we use Google Translate didn't mean much to them. I don't think but they were used. Most people were used to it.
But I will say that Android phones are much more popular there than iPhones.
It's the Samsung world.
Capital.
Gotcha. So you both have spent a lot of time on bikes. Yeah, but I'm wondering if on this trip, did you learn anything about or change your perspective or get some perspective on aging and biking?
I hadn't done a trip for years where I wasn't being supported by having people carry your stuff and having prearranged hotels and motels and all that. So this was the first time in probably 40 or 50 years I rode a bike with my gear on it.
Mm.
And that took a little getting used to. I mean, you're just not as mobile. I mean, if you want to go down a hill or something, you can't have to carry your bike. You can't carry your bike with that weight on the back. You got to plan a little differently.
Yeah, I would say for me, I had a physical challenge the first day. I hadn't worked out much of anything. I'm very dedicated to eating and dining, and going out in New York, live in Brooklyn. And so I got a little bit behind on things. But my usual experience has been wherever I've done anything, yeah, the first day is, you don't want it to be too hard, but you get through it, and then it builds, during the trip. Well, the first day was a bit of a challenge for me, and I cramped up very seriously after maybe, I don't know, it was a pretty long trip. Maybe we did 80 miles a day, 70, 80 miles, something like that. But it was hot. It was hot from about 10 in the morning. And I had never had that happen. And it wasn't just being out of shape.
Right.
I didn't react. Yeah, I didn't react. Next day, fine. That cramping and, kind of having to pedal with one leg and, all that kind of stuff was a little bit of an experience.
But he kept going, Tom.
Well, yeah, fantastic. I think that, yeah, to have that experience and get up the next day and go, okay, let's do this again. That's fantastic. What about the cuisine? Did you enjoy that? Was it experiencing new things? How did you find it?
Well, it's the first time I've eaten something that was moving in my mouth. It may have been moved down the intestinal tract. They serve you a live octopus that sort of been cut up, and the octopus doesn't know it's whatever. And that was a first.
Yeah.
Excellent fresh fish.
We knew it was fresh.
Yeah, but I think excellent food. Generally on the spicier side. Great fresh fish, particularly Busan, but all over. I'd say, Charlie, we sort of gravitated towards barbecue places.
We did a lot of Korean barbecues. That was safe. Every meal comes with kimchi, and different types of kimchi, all and a bunch of other pickled vegetables and the like. But it was fun. It was probably the most traditional Korean meal we had was at the guest house.
Okay.
The morning breakfast started out with fish soup.
I think that we did learn sort of a local custom. We were pretty hungry. Actually, I'm usually pretty hungry. But we're sitting down at dinner, and we're at a barbecue place, and we did somehow get beers. And then we're waiting for the waitresses. We're not that many people in there to come over and serve us. And I'm used to being trained to not put your hand up. And I started to put my hand up, and I know they're looking at me, but they do nothing. So we go about 10 minutes and nobody comes by. And then Charlie says, he's always ahead of things. He says, well, maybe what's this button for? And he pushes the button, and in 2 seconds, the same people I've been waving at are right there.
Okay. Well, that's good to know that they have been trained to respond to the button.
If you don't know the button, you may starve.
Okay. Do you have any moments, a doubt during the journey when you were climbing or the heat or anything?
Charlie did the first day. He said, how can I dump Looney?
My doubts were, are we going to have a day two?
Now, in that kind of heat, it seems like electrolytes and everything are pretty important. Did you feel like you planned well for that?
The answer would be no. I usually, I pioneered the quad espresso, and I had 2 quad espressos at 6 in the morning, and that doesn't help.
I had some nuns tablets, and the other thing that I thought was an eye opener for me was how accessible water was. I mean, wherever you stayed, every hotel, even these cheap love motels, there's a refrigerator with free bottled water. You go to a restaurant. We stopped at one restaurant along the bike trail, and the bottled water was just. The woman was so nice; she actually gave us frozen bottled water so that we could put them in the bike and they stay cold.
Nice.
That was a treasure, that spot. Yeah.
There were water places along these trails where you could fill up water jugs if you wanted to. I mean, it was very bike friendly.
Yeah.
One time we came into town, you cross the river, and the entire bridge is ordained with these bike sculptures. And you get to the end of the bridge and you're at the bike museum.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Do they have a big manufacturer there? I'm not sure about Korean bikes.
I don't think so.
I think so.
Not like Taiwan or some of the
Right.
Japan. We didn't stop reading about it. It's quite a museum. I think it's antique, as well as modern. But why it was there, it may be that there's a bicycle manufacturer that's there.
Do you have other big rides planned, or what? Where are you at with that now?
I've got nothing planned.
Yeah, the loosely Seattle-based group has been discussing Arkansas. Yeah, and they may do Korea in the spring. Maybe I pioneered it. No, but they like it. But nothing major on the radar. I thought the look of the ride in Mongolia looked like a pretty cool thing to do.
You think you're ready to ride across lakes with your bike?
Yeah. And I'm going to bring the lab to pull me along.
The environment there, being along the river, that sounds really beautiful.
Yes.
Do you see places that would have that kind of beauty that you might be interested in going? Do you think there was a particular kind of environment, or do you think you could find that other places?
In Korea, there's a coastal route that's supposed to be quite interesting. These trails are go more east-west. Ours, they say cross-country, but it's really more southeastern. It kind of angles on the Busan. You can go across. I'm pretty confident that you could have a very nice ride without a trail. Yeah, as long as you stay off the freeway. It looked to me like the East Coast with their islands and so on was interesting. And there is some trail over there too. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there for good cycling. And it's beautiful. Mountains are beautiful. Yeah.
That Facebook group, there are a number of people I saw over the last several months have done the Seoul to Busan and then continue and come, instead of taking the bullet train back, ride up the East Coast trails back into Seoul. So you do a loop. It would be, it'd be a lot longer, obviously.
Yeah, that one you probably, with time off, you probably need 2 weeks to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is probably, we were 6 nights out, Charlie?
I think 5 nights, 6 days.
Yeah. This could be done in 4, if you were ready to go. But I'd probably, if I did it again, I'd probably take a couple more nights and planned a place to spend some time. And we were out in the country. I mean, biking is so wonderful because you're there and you can stop and see things. We got all that. But there were some country areas you probably could have spent a day or 2 at and just hung out and looked around right there.
Well, I really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing this experience. And it sounds like you would, if someone was considering it, you'd encourage them to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the best rides I've ever had.
Nice.
Except for Ragbri, but that's another story.
Well, again, thanks so much for coming on, Steve. Nice to meet you. And Charlie, thanks for coming on again.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure.
Take care now.
See you later. Bye-bye.
I have never done a week-long bike ride, but I hope to do one this season of the podcast. I certainly don't feel ready to work out the details of running a bike in a country where I don't speak the language. Hopefully, after I get a trip across the state of Washington behind me, I will be more open to that kind of cycling challenge. I think I would probably start with a bicycle tour group, actually. The thing that attracts me most about a trip in a different country is the pace at which you move through an area. It just seems like the right pace to really absorb the scenery and the culture. I found an article online that I will link in the show notes. It is from a site called epicroadrides.com. The title is Best Cycling Holiday Destinations in the World 2023. The one place that I found most intriguing is Cyprus, but any planning for biking abroad will have to wait for now. I still need to figure out a lot of things about how to get from one side of Washington state to the other. Please let me know where you have traveled with your bike that was really captivating. You can find my email and the link to the show Instagram in the show notes. I would love to hear from you. I hope you are able to keep the pedals turning wherever you are this time of year. And remember, age is just a gear change.